For example, suppose the array length is of 10, then array is like a variable, but it can save multiple values. So if the array length is 10, it can save 10 values. Okay. So suppose the array name is str. Normally we give the array name with arr, since that is the coding standard which is followed. So suppose arr name. Okay. I'll show you with an example. So like we have str name equal to Ramesh. For array we can give our name, and this array name will have a length which is mentioned in the bracket. Say for example 9. Now this 9, this is the length of the array. Now the array, this arr name can save multiple values. Say for example Ramesh, Suresh, Dipesh, Kalpesh. So a series of values, and we can use this arr name in function to return multiple values. Now since you do not have much idea about the array, so I won't be explaining you how exactly we can pass multiple values in a function. But once you go through the arrays, once I explain you how arrays work, you will automatically understand how you can use it in a function to send multiple values. Now the second way is also by declaring a global variable inside the function. Okay, so use global variables in the script function library and use in functions to store output values. Now what is global variable is, I'll just give a brief about it. Like we have the scope of the variable. Every variable has a scope. Now these things like array, variables, the scope of the variable, these concepts will definitely be taught to you in the further chapter when we actually start coding. Okay, in our practical session. At that time the scope of the variable will be explained. That is, a variable cannot be used everywhere. Okay, suppose I'm using a variable in one action, that variable scope will be till the end of the action. Okay, you cannot use some other use the variable value in some other action. That is, you cannot call the variable, you can declare the variable in one action and then call the variable in some other action. Okay, so there is scope for every variable. So what I mean by saying global variable is, global variables can be accessed by any action in a particular test. Okay, so I can declare it in one action and I can access it in some other action, and that's why it is called global, because it can be used across different actions. So if I'm using global variable in my function, I can use and I can manipulate the value of the global variable in the function. I do some calculations inside the function, and the final value I save it in the global variable. So this global variable can be used anywhere in the action also, since this value can be used across the functions and actions. So I can use the same value in the action. So in this way, and I can have multiple global variables in my function. So suppose I have 5 global variables in my function, which have and the values of these are decided by the different transactions which are carried out in your function. So like addition, multiplication, whatever the transaction is, and the final value of these 5 variables are global variables are stored in your function. So these values can be accessed by any action in your test. So in this way we can pass multiple values from the function to the action by using arrays or by using global variables. Both the concepts will be clear to you when we actually start our hands-on. So for now you just need to know the concept, that how functions can by default pass only single value from to the action, from function to the action, but they are also capable of passing on multiple values. So these were some of the important differences between actions and functions. There are few other differences as well, but they are not as important, so I have not discussed it. This is all what you should know so that you can get the clear idea about what is action, what is function, when action is applicable in your script, and where functions are applicable in your script. So we have covered this part wherein we have modularized the script in actions and functions. The next chapter which we are going to see is descriptive programming, which is one of the most important chapters, since it's related to coding. And like we had object repository, wherein the script is generated by dragging the object from the object repository into your script area, right? So what descriptive programming does is, let's imagine that the QTP doesn't have the object in your object repository. Say for example, there's a edit box, and I need to perform some operation using QTP on that edit box. So first of all, what we do is we save some object, save the object of the edit box in our object repository, and what we do is normally drag and drop the object in our script, and a default script is generated. For edit box it will be dot type, dot set, that is we set some value for the edit box. So this was what we learned earlier. Now suppose QTP doesn't have this object in the object repository, that is QTP has to dynamically identify the object. That is, while running it won't have the object in the object repository. Say for example, edit box is not there in the object repository, but QTP has to perform some operation on the edit box just by during run session. So is it possible? How QTP will identify without having the object of edit box in the object repository? So it is possible using descriptive programming. Okay, so descriptive programming is another way of coding without using the object repository, which we earlier used. And using descriptive programming, QTP can dynamically identify the object and perform operation on the object without actually looking at the object repository and searching for the object. Let's see how descriptive programming can be really useful for our coding, and what are the advantages of descriptive programming over object repository programming. Okay.